We have another whole branch of encryption, which really only came into common usage in the mid-1970s. We've used symmetric algorithms for thousands of years. But with the work of Diffie-Hellman, they developed this idea of an asymmetric, or sometimes called a public key algorithm. With a public key algorithm, we actually then have a pair of keys. These keys are mathematically related, and there's one half of this key pair that we call the private key, and another that we call then the public key. The private key must be kept private, because from the private key you can calculate the public key. However, this is a one-way function, and even though we could give our public key to everyone else in the world, and everyone else in the world knows that there's a mathematical relationship between the private and that public key, it would be considered computationally infeasible that they would be able to go back and then derive the private key just from knowledge of the public key. The idea is that we have a key pair, and half of that key pair we keep protected, but the other half we can share with everyone. These keys are mathematically related. In fact, as we see, the public key is actually then computed or calculated based on the private key. And the keys only work as a pair. If I've used one half of the key pair in the encryption operation, I would have to use the other half of that same key pair in the decryption operation. Let's look at how this could work. Let's say that the sender wants to send a message confidentially then to the receiver. So what the sender does is take that plain text message and feed it into a crypto system. And now using an algorithm such as RSA or ECC, elliptic curve cryptography, they encrypt that plain text message with the receiver's private key. The receiver's private key has been given to them so that they can then encrypt the message, and then that encrypted message can be sent through that insecure channel to the receiver. When the receiver receives that encrypted message, they will decrypt it by feeding it back into the same crypto system, but they would have to use the other half of the key pair to decrypt it. Since the receiver's public key was used to encrypt the message, the only key that could be used to decrypt the message would be the receiver's private key. Now the receiver would be able to read the message. But you can see that this, for example, provides excellent confidentiality, because even if we have a man-in-the-middle attack, the man in the middle is not going to be able to read or understand the message because we know the receiver would never let anybody have their private key. So what are the benefits of an asymmetric algorithm? Well, the main thing we do is we use these to support symmetric key algorithms. We saw a few moments ago how symmetric is good to encrypt a message, but it's poor at key distribution. We have to get that key to the receiver. And this is where asymmetric works very well. You could encrypt the message with an AES key, but then you will encrypt the AES key with the receiver's public key, as we saw here. When the receiver receives the encrypted key now, they can decrypt that AES key using their private key, which would allow them then to decrypt the encrypted message. So we can see that in many cases, the use of encryption is based on a hybrid. We use then the speed and confidentiality features of symmetric key encryption to encrypt a large message. But we then use the key distribution potential of an asymmetric algorithm to send that symmetric key to the far end. Now you could easily ask, well, why don't we just encrypt the message with the receiver's public key? Because the problem is that asymmetric algorithms are really, really slow. So here's some of the places we use this. We use these if you've ever set up, for example, an IPsec VPN using Oakley IsoCamp. You've actually then used the very first implementation of asymmetric algorithms known as Diffie-Hellman. And Diffie-Hellman is what we often call the key agreement protocol, so that the two parties can agree on the symmetric key they're going to use based on asymmetric encryption. We also use it in online banking, where we use something like transport layer security, or formerly SSL. And TLS, for example, usually runs on then an implementation of RSA. Again, RSA is used to allow us to distribute the symmetric key that will then be used to encrypt the message. The other thing is that using certificates, a certificate binds or links the public key to its owner. So if I receive a public key from John, and there's a certificate issued by a company like Symantec, Entrust, VeriSign that says this public key belongs to John, then I know that if I encrypt this message, it will truly go to John. We authenticated the recipient. And the idea, of course, with asymmetric is we can establish that authentication through the use of certificates. We also will look at, in the next chapter, how we can use asymmetric algorithms to actually then prove that this message came from this person, proving both the integrity and source of the message through something we'll call a digital signature.